We have a really, really good first reserve super sub, I'm going to call him. He's a columnist for the Telegraph and contributor to many other fine publications. The excellent Robert Taylor. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, Kevin. I'll try and do my best to replace your normal guest as best I can.
OK, well, just say a lot of things that you shouldn't really say, you know, insult people libelously, that kind of thing, and you'll fit the mould perfectly. But seriously, Robert, let's talk first of all about the extraordinary scenes in central London today. And perhaps before we do, we could sum up the kind of mood there with an interview that Jeremy Clarkson gave to the BBC. Victoria Derbyshire descended on the event for Newsnight. And it was this sort of patronising nature of her interview that I think feeds into or informs the fury of our agricultural community as well. It's, you know, she's saying to Clarkson, you know, well, how else is the Chancellor going to pay for public services? You know, as if the only way we can pay for public services is to fleece the farmers. Anyway, let's have a look at that, shall we? Are we ready?
So it's not about you, it's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax?
Classic BBC there, classic. Oh yeah, it's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC. OK, let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
I wanted a shoot, OK? That's even worse to the BBC. I wanted a shoot, which comes with the benefit of not having to pay inheritance tax. Now I do.
And on it went. As I say, Robert, she went on to say, well, how else is the Chancellor going to pay for public services? This is the point. I mean, the BBC, of course, reflecting the view of the socialist government, the view of the left, that everything must take second place to the public sector. How do we pay for doctors? How do we pay for the NHS? Oh, let's fleece the farmers. The fury there was off the scale. And as I was just saying to Jeremy Kyle, Robert, it wasn't just... They think 20,000, maybe 40,000. The whole of London was packed with tractors and people in tweed jackets, and good for them, I say. But also they were supported by many townies. This was a convergence of protest about a government that I think the people of this country thinks this government is doing us wrong. It really is.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to add to that from my side as well. I think people are realising that the wool was pulled over their eyes by the Labour Party before the general election, and now we're seeing the reality. And, of course, Keir Starmer himself pointed to the BBC today on his latest jolly, wherever he is. I think he's in Brazil, isn't he, at some major meeting of some sort.
Being important and international, because we can't stand the sight of him. He's going abroad all the time. Now, this is his 15th trip since July the 4th when he came into power. So he goes abroad so people actually don't laugh at him and don't ridicule him. So that's what he's doing. But, yeah, nowhere to be seen.
Nowhere to be seen, and pointing to the BBC, even the BBC, he said, support me on the inheritance tax for farmers. So therefore, it must be right. So the BBC and our current Labour government busily supporting each other and propping each other up. And I think Jeremy Clarkson roundly demolished that in his little interview with Victoria Derbyshire today, which was great to see, by the way, Kevin.
Yes, it really was. I mean, I love the way that even the BBC supports me. The BBC will always support metropolitan elites who want to plough all public funds into the public sector, you know, who obsess on the NHS, who obsess on the civil service, and so on and so forth. So his idea that even the BBC, well, the BBC would always naturally support you, Starmer. But here's a couple of statistics, right? So there's a problem here. And I'm going to say it out loud. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that the government is lying to us about this inheritance tax. Now, incredibly, there are 209,000 farms in this country. And Starmer says that only 500 farms will be affected by the inheritance tax, what they're calling the tractor tax. If only 500 farms are being affected by it, why would you bother with the policy? It would raise utter peanuts. And B, if it's only 500 farms, how come there were 40,000 people protesting in central London today? Starmer's lying again, isn't he?
Well, he may well be lying on that. DEFRA, as I understand it, are saying that 66% of farms are affected by this tax. Certainly the Union of Farmers is saying 66% of farms are affected. Judging by the turnout in central London today, it seems you would have thought by that 99% of farms are affected. But here's the real deal, Kevin.
Yeah.
The Labour Party said nothing about this before the general election. In fact, they specifically ruled it out. And we had Steve Reed, Environment Secretary, saying something like, we have no plans to do this. Well, when the Labour Party says we have no plans to do something, you can read into that, of course, we're going to once the election is over.
Yeah. Starmer, I think, also promised there would be no changes to the inheritance tax system agriculturally. So, I mean, you know, I don't say this lightly, but this government, it's very easy time and time again to say, you are liars, you're lying. Now, this internecine row between DEFRA, the Department of Environment and Farming and Agriculture, and the Treasury, Robert Reeves's department, or Liar Reeves as we now call her, economical with the truth about her own background. We'll talk about that in a little while. Now, the Treasury wants DEFRA, and indeed all of their apparatchiks, to spin that actually only 27% of farms will be affected by this draconian new measure. If you think about it, in itself, that seems like quite a lot to me. DEFRA, this is not a public row, but we know it has been raging beneath the headlines. DEFRA is saying, yeah, but that's not true. It's 66%. And that's exactly what the National Farmers Union say. They say 2/3. DEFRA, Steve Reed, despite he's doing his bit for the government, but we know that privately, him and his acolytes at DEFRA are furious at being told to spin that it's only 27% of farms, when in fact it's 66% of farms. So I mean, I believe DEFRA, I believe the Farmers Union, I believe the numbers I saw today. The big question here is, Robert, I mean, what possessed Rachel Reeves and Starmer to do this? I mean, if you add this to the winter fuel allowance cut, they've come up with the two of the most catastrophic policies I can remember, you know, in a generation. I would suggest it's definitely poll tax proportions. Well, didn't they see this coming?
I don't think they did, and the reason they don't is because they're a very urban party. Yes, they've won 100 rural constituencies apparently in July in the general election, but those are new MPs. The MPs who are ministers, who are cabinet ministers, pretty much uniformly represent urban constituencies. And the accusation is, which I think is a fair accusation, they just don't understand the countryside. They don't understand how the farmers will react to these kind of policies. And if Starmer really thought he did understand, what he should have done in Wales when he was there with all the farmers outside is come out of the front door, if he was so determined that his budget is right and Rachel Reeves's budget is right, and actually confront those farmers and say, this is how it's going to work. But instead of which, I'm afraid, as one of the farmers said, he scuttled away out of the back door like a rat. Mm-hmm. That's not my words. That's the words of one of the farmers who was outside the front door waiting for the Prime Minister.
Well, let's have a little look at Keir Starmer responding to this protest. Can we play Keir, please?
On the question of inheritance tax, the example I've given is a typical example of parents wanting to pass on a farm to one of their children. And in those cases, when you look at all the thresholds available, that means that only farms over the value of £3 million will be affected by the changes, and therefore the vast majority of farms will be unaffected. And those that are affected will only pay half the inheritance tax that other people pay, 20%, and they will have a 10-year period over which to pay it. And so that's why I'm very confident in saying that the vast majority will not be affected. how farmers then arrange their affairs within their family is obviously a matter for them.
So if the vast majority won't be affected, and I don't believe him, I think that's a lie, as we've been discussing. Ask DEFRA. But if it only affects a very small number of farms, why bother with it? Why bother in the first place? And now Rachel Reeves, when asked that question, why are you bothering with this? You know, she glossed over the fact that, you know, she wasn't an economist at the Bank of Halifax in Scotland, and glossed over the fact that far from being a junior chess champion, she came 29th. But she said, well, you know, the nation's agricultural community have got to help us pay for the NHS and schools. So what she implies there, inherently in her mind, the NHS and schools are far more important than the agricultural community, are far more important than farming. And so farming must be the cash cow, if I can use that pun, for her beloved public services. Well, that is calculated to rather anger farmers, isn't it?
It certainly is. And if farmers decide to get militant, and one of them, quite a few of them, I think, were saying today in Trafalgar Square, we're going to get militant about this, I think Rachel Reeves will discover that actually farming and food security is every bit as important as the NHS and our schools. And why should it fall on ordinary farmers, some of whom earn very, very little indeed? They may have a farm worth £1 million, but their profitability every year is a tiny fraction of that. Why should it fall on farmers to prop up the excess of this Labour government in rewarding striking railway workers, in sending 450 officials to Azerbaijan for the COP conference last week,
Exactly
and
right.
pay awards for public sector workers above inflation? Why should it fall on farmers who are doing a great job to pay for all that excess?
Absolutely. In effect, she's sort of asking farmers to fund £80,000 salaries for train drivers, and this is the way that they think. And Elon Musk, who loves to taunt Starmer from across the Atlantic, he says that Britain has gone full Stalin here. I mean, certainly you could argue what you just said, Robert, that, you know, of course the NHS and schools are vital, but you could argue that agriculture is the most important facet of British life. You know, this is how the public eat. We need to eat food. And this lot are attacking the producers of our food. So I think they are making a profound fundamental mistake here.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about the importance of energy security, and I absolutely agree with that. But food security in this world that we live in now, very unpredictable world, I would suggest is every bit as important. And just one final thing to say about this. Maggie Thatcher famously said that socialism is spending other people's money. Well, I think we're seeing that with knobs on with this farmers' dispute, taxing farmers to give it to other people.
Yeah, I mean, the level of hatred against this government is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. You know, I know that the Tories, and even after the winter fuel allowance row, they still thought that the Labour was so far ahead they would struggle at the next election. Now, with the farmers, I know that there's a mood of confidence in Tory towers. We can take them in 5 years because they're so cack-handed, so hopeless, I mean, so politically naive and frankly useless. Talking of which, when we come back, Robert, we're going to talk about Wales, which the First Minister of Wales has decided is a hotbed of racism and something needs to be done. So